Every weekend, my family treated my house like it was theirs. They ate my food, rearranged my furniture, and even invited people over without asking. One day, I decided not to open the door, and everything I thought I knew about family changed. Let me tell you what happened. My name is Vivian, I'm 32, and I work as a school counselor. I finally managed to buy my own little home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. I loved the peace, the little garden I planted, and the feeling that I could finally have space for myself. But my family didn't see it that way. Every weekend, my parents, my sister Melissa, and her husband Brad would show up at my door uninvited. They didn't just visit, they treated my home like it was theirs. My fridge was emptied, my couch was claimed, and somehow, my cozy house turned into a chaotic family hub. They brought their kids, their friends, and sometimes even neighbors, making loud jokes and acting as if I didn't exist. At first, I didn't say anything. My parents would smile and guilt me with, "We're family, Viv. That's what family does." Melissa would add, "Come on, you love seeing everyone together, right?" I did love my family, but I also loved my space. And every time I tried to voice a concern, I was labeled as selfish. I started feeling drained before the weekend even began. My home wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a trap. I would spend Friday nights cleaning up after the last wave of visitors and dreading Saturday mornings when the doorbell rang again. I began to dread the weekends more than I enjoyed them. Inside, I felt frustration building up, but I swallowed it down, pretending everything was fine. I told myself it was normal for families to gather. I told myself I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something had to change. I worked hard for everything I had, and seeing my house slowly taken over was painful. My parents and Melissa didn't understand boundaries. They didn't see how exhausting it was to host them in my own home week after week. I started realizing that their love came with conditions that ignored my comfort, my feelings, and my right to say no. That's when I began thinking differently. Maybe being selfish wasn't a bad thing. Maybe protecting my home, my peace, and my life from constant intrusion was the only way to reclaim what was mine. Little did I know, the decision I was about to make that weekend would set off a chain of events that no one saw coming. Not even me. Weekends started to feel like a nightmare. Every Friday evening, I'd brace myself for the inevitable chaos. My family didn't just visit anymore, they took over. My fridge would be emptied within hours, my pantry raided, and leftovers sometimes left to rot in containers I didn't recognize. My laundry machine, which I had hoped to use in peace, was constantly running with their piles of clothes, sometimes stained or stretched out. And the worst, they sometimes took naps in my bed like it was just another weekend tradition. Melissa and Brad rarely came alone. Their kids would run through my house like it belonged to them, leaving fingerprints on every surface and sometimes tearing corners of my furniture or scratching floors. I'd find cushions slashed, toys scattered across the living room, and my carefully arranged decorations knocked over. I tried to remind myself that kids would be kids, but it was different when it was happening in my own sanctuary week after week. My home, which once felt warm and safe, now felt foreign. I tried to talk to my parents about it, hoping for some understanding, but their response always left me frustrated. "Viv, this is your home, yes, but it's our home too," my mom would say with a gentle smile, as if her words alone should make me feel better. My dad would nod in agreement, patting my shoulder and saying, "Family should share, Viv. Don't be so uptight." I wanted to scream that this wasn't sharing, it was taking over. But each time I opened my mouth, I stopped myself, worried that expressing anger would make me selfish or ungrateful. I started to notice a strange feeling growing inside me. I was living in my own house, yet it didn't feel like mine anymore. Even when my family left late Sunday night, I'd walk through the living room, surveying the mess they'd left behind, and feel the walls closing in. The laughter and chatter that once felt comforting now felt like a reminder of how little control I had over my own space. I tried small acts of resistance at first, like hiding snacks or making subtle notes about chores, but it didn't change much. My family brushed off every hint that their behavior was disruptive, laughing off my frustrations as me being too sensitive. Each time they ignored my boundaries, the frustration inside me quietly hardened into resentment. By the time Sunday evening rolled around, I was exhausted. I'd spend hours tidying up, putting toys back, refolding blankets, and trying to restore my home to the way it should have been. But I knew it wouldn't last. Friday would come again, and the cycle would repeat. Weekends weren't rest days anymore. They were battles I didn't ask for. I felt trapped in my own home, and the thought of it made me ache. Every act of intrusion, no matter how small, chipped away at the comfort and pride I once felt in my house. The growing invasion was no longer just inconvenient. It was slowly taking over my life, and I knew I had to figure out a way to protect what was mine. One afternoon, I overheard a neighbor chatting with someone else and suddenly felt a sharp twist in my chest. Melissa had been telling people, "We basically live at Vivian's house on weekends. It's like our vacation spot." I couldn't believe it. She wasn't just treating my home like a hangout. She was bragging about it to the world. The thought that my own sister was flaunting how she exploited my space made me feel sick. It didn't stop there. Brad, who usually acted like he respected my things, started using my garage tools without asking. One weekend, I went out to check on a shelf I had been building, only to find a hammer broken and a drill completely ruined. When I asked him what happened, he shrugged casually. It was just a little accident, no big deal. No apology, no acknowledgement that those were my tools, my hard work, my money. The breaking point came on a Sunday. I decided to leave work early, hoping for a quiet afternoon to relax. As I pulled into my driveway, my heart sank. Lights were on, music was playing, and through the window, I could see my living room filled with people. Melissa, Brad, their kids, and even a couple of their friends laughing on my couch. They hadn't even bothered to tell me they were hosting guests in my own home. I stood frozen, clutching my keys, feeling like an intruder in the place I had built for myself. I knocked on the door, my voice tight with anger. "Melissa, Brad, what are you doing here? This is my house." Melissa glanced up, smiling like I was overreacting. "Relax, Viv. It's family. We're just hanging out." Brad laughed along, clearly enjoying my frustration. "Yeah, come on, don't be so dramatic. You know we're just making ourselves at home." I felt a rush of disbelief and humiliation. They weren't just disrespecting my space. They were openly mocking the fact that it mattered to me. My anger surged, but I stayed composed, trying to make sense of how they could act so entitled. My home, my sanctuary, had become a stage for them to perform as if I didn't exist. The laughter, the noise, and the casual disregard for my presence hit me harder than I expected. For the rest of the afternoon, I watched silently from the hallway, feeling my frustration harden into something heavier. It wasn't just that they overstepped. It was that they treated my house like a playground and my feelings like a joke. I realized in that moment that their visits weren't innocent. They were deliberate, a constant reminder that my boundaries meant nothing. Every grin, every shrug, every comment about family was a subtle stab, a quiet betrayal that chipped away at the respect I thought we had. That day, I walked into my bedroom and sat down, staring at the walls I had worked so hard to make mine. I knew things couldn't continue this way. Something inside me shifted. I couldn't let them turn my home into their weekend getaway anymore. That Sunday, I felt the first real spark of determination to take back what was mine. My birthday came and went quietly for me, or at least that's how I had hoped it would. I imagined a small celebration, maybe a dinner with a friend or two, something simple in my own home where I could feel appreciated. But of course, my family had other plans. That morning, I woke to the smell of food being cooked in my kitchen and the sound of voices laughing loudly in the living room. I walked out, thinking they had at least remembered that it was my day, only to find my house filled with balloons and decorations. But none of them for me. Melissa had completely taken over, announcing to everyone that we were celebrating her promotion. Brad was handing out drinks and chatting with guests while their kids ran around, decorating the living room with streamers and leaving little messes everywhere. My own birthday was completely erased from the room, replaced by Melissa's shining moment. I tried to smile, hoping to hide the hurt, but every congratulatory toast for her made my stomach twist. I was in my own home, yet I felt invisible. As the day went on, I retreated to the kitchen to gather my thoughts, only to overhear Melissa talking to one of the guests, laughing in that loud, careless way she always had. "Can you believe Viv? She's pathetic, still single, and obsessed about her house. It's kind of sad," she said, glancing in my direction. My chest tightened and my hands shook. I couldn't believe she was mocking me, right in my own home on my birthday. The words hit harder than any argument or stolen moment of peace ever had. All those weekends of intrusion, the disrespect, the constant feeling of being a guest in my own home, it all crashed down at once. I realized painfully that my family didn't respect me. They didn't see my hard work, my boundaries, or my feelings. To them, My house was just a stage for their convenience, and I was simply someone to be mocked and overlooked. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my living room. The balloons hung limp, the leftover drinks sat untouched, and the laughter of the day echoed in my mind like a cruel reminder. I let myself cry for the first time in months, not just because of this single birthday, but because of every stolen weekend, every broken tool, every insult wrapped in a smile. I cried for the respect I never received, for the family who had treated my home and me like an afterthought. As I wiped my tears, a new clarity began to form. I couldn't change their behavior overnight, and I couldn't make them see my worth. But I could decide how I responded. I could finally see that being kind and patient hadn't earned me respect. It had only invited more exploitation. And as painful as it was, that night marked the moment I knew I had to take control of my home, my boundaries, and my life. I couldn't let anyone push me aside anymore, not even my own family. After that birthday, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Week after week of intrusion, disrespect, and subtle humiliation had taken its toll. I realized that if I didn't take control, my home and my peace would never be mine again. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay while my family trampled over my boundaries. Something had to change. The very next week, I made a small but firm decision. I would start locking my doors during the weekdays. No more surprise visits, no more uninvited guests. I also decided I wouldn't leave a spare key for anyone, not even my parents. It wasn't out of anger or revenge. It was about protecting my home and reclaiming my space. The first day I put my plan into action, I could already feel the tension building. When my mom called, asking why she couldn't just drop by for coffee, I calmly told her, "Mom, it's my home. I need space, and this is what I need right now." Her voice faltered, as if she couldn't understand the idea that my house belonged to me, not her. Melissa and Brad were even worse. Melissa texted nonstop, complaining that I was turning my back on family and making the kids upset. Brad called me, trying to guilt me into opening my door. Each message and call was a test, a challenge to my decision. For a moment, I felt a familiar pang of doubt. Maybe I was being selfish, maybe I was overreacting. But I reminded myself of every weekend ruined, every insult overheard, every tool broken, and every time my home had been invaded without permission. I realized that boundaries weren't about punishment, they were about respect. By keeping my doors locked, I wasn't shutting out my family entirely. I was teaching them that my home, my life, and my feelings mattered too. It was uncomfortable for them, sure, and their anger stung, but I knew that discomfort was the only way they might start seeing things from my perspective. Even as I faced the backlash, I felt a quiet strength growing inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting out of fear or guilt. I was acting out of necessity, out of the understanding that a home without boundaries isn't truly yours. I watched their texts and calls come in, but I didn't give in. I didn't justify myself, and I didn't beg for understanding. I simply held my ground, and that act alone felt empowering. By the end of the week, the anger had started to fade, replaced by a grudging acknowledgement. They didn't like the change, but they had to accept it. And I realized something important. Reclaiming your space isn't easy, and it isn't always popular, especially with family. But it is necessary. I may have felt conflicted in the beginning, but that small act of locking the door reminded me that my home and my peace were worth standing up for. And I wasn't going to give either of them away again. The weekend I had been dreading for months finally arrived. Melissa, Brad, and the kids showed up right on schedule, but this time, I wasn't opening the door. I could hear their voices from the porch, laughing and calling my name, completely unaware, or perhaps willfully ignoring, that I had taken a stand. My heart was pounding as I gripped the doorknob from the inside, making sure the lock held. At first, there was confused knocking, polite calls, and then, as the minutes passed, the tone changed. Melissa's voice became sharper, annoyed. "Vivian, open up. Don't be ridiculous. We're family." Brad's voice joined in, louder and more commanding. "Come on, Viv. You can't just lock us out. You owe us." I stayed silent, my pulse racing, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Every shout felt like a test of my resolve, but I reminded myself why I was doing this. My home, my rules. Then the yelling escalated. The kids began crying, caught between tantrums and confusion, while Melissa and Brad banged on the door with increasing frustration. They pounded their fists, shouted threats, and tried to guilt me with every accusation they could muster. I could hear Brad shouting something about how selfish I was, and Melissa repeating over and over, "You can't treat family like this." My hands were clammy, my chest tight, but I refused to budge. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment I reclaimed control. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my parents arrived. I could hear their car pulling into the driveway, the crunch of gravel under tires echoing ominously. They came to the front door and immediately sided with Melissa, their voices joining in the chorus of anger. "Vivian, how could you betray your family? How could you turn your back on us?" my mother yelled. My father's voice boomed over hers, filled with disappointment. I felt a wave of isolation wash over me, but I kept my stance. I peeked through the curtain, watching as my family's anger spilled over into a full-blown standoff. Neighbors had started to gather across the street, curious and whispering among themselves. The air was tense, thick with frustration, betrayal, and disbelief. They shouted, demanding entry, trying to break through the lock with words, gestures, and sheer persistence, but I stayed hidden behind the door, silent and unyielding. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, each one testing my resolve. I could feel their anger vibrating through the walls of my house, each accusation a reminder of how long I had ignored my own needs. Yet, for the first time, I felt an unexpected strength. I was no longer the passive host, the quiet victim of their habits. I was standing firm, letting them see, maybe for the first time, that my home and my boundaries were not negotiable. That weekend, behind that locked door, I realized I could face their wrath and still hold on to myself. A few days after the weekend standoff, I thought things might calm down. I was still shaken from the confrontation, but I felt a small sense of relief knowing I had finally stood my ground. That relief disappeared the moment I started receiving calls and messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. One by one, extended family members began calling, their voices dripping with judgment. "Vivian, how could you kick your sister and her kids out?" one aunt demanded. "You're being so greedy, keeping your own family from coming over," a cousin scolded. I froze. My chest tightened, and my hands shook as I realized what Melissa had done. She had been telling everyone I was the villain, that I was selfish and heartless. My attempt to reclaim my home had been twisted into a story where I was the one at fault. I tried to explain, to calm them down, but their anger and disappointment were relentless. Every conversation ended with guilt-laden statements that made me question myself for the first time since I had locked my doors. Just as I was starting to gather my composure, I discovered something far worse. While looking through my mail and paperwork, I found documents that didn't belong to me. Tax forms and school correspondence addressed to Melissa's kids, all sent to my home. My stomach sank as I read the details. Melissa had been using my address without permission to claim tax benefits and to enroll her children in a better school district. She had been exploiting my home for personal gain, not just for convenience or weekend visits. I felt sick. It wasn't just that she had been freeloading, taking over my home and my things. It was that she had been deliberately using me for her own advantage. Every knock on the door, every meal eaten, every mess left behind suddenly felt like part of a bigger scheme. The laughter, the casual disregard for my rules, the mocking comments, they weren't just selfishness. They were part of a plan to take advantage of me, to turn my kindness and patience into their personal benefit. For the first time, I truly understood the depth of their betrayal. My family hadn't just crossed boundaries, they had treated me as an object, a resource to exploit. The people I had trusted most had been manipulating me while publicly painting me as the bad guy. It was a double blow. Privately, they had taken from me, and publicly, they had humiliated me. Sitting in my living room, I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. Every lesson I had learned about family, trust, and love felt twisted, replaced with a harsh reality I hadn't been ready to face. I realized that reclaiming my home was no longer just about setting boundaries. It was about defending myself from deliberate exploitation. They hadn't just disrespected me. They had actively tried to use me, and now I knew I couldn't let it continue. Something had to change, and this time, I knew exactly what needed to be done. I realized that talking wouldn't be enough anymore. Melissa had crossed every line, not just invading my home, but using it to benefit herself and painting me as the villain to everyone else. I needed proof. Something concrete that I could show to stop her lies once and for all. Over the next few days, I started quietly gathering evidence. I took photos of the messes her kids had left behind, documented the broken tools and furniture, and even compiled receipts showing groceries and supplies that had been used without permission. I collected copies of the mail and school papers that proved she had been using my address for her gain. I also reached out to a few neighbors who had seen Melissa's constant presence at my house. They were more than willing to back me up, recounting the weekends she had shown up uninvited, hosting friends, and behaving as though my home belonged to her. Slowly, I built a paper trail and a collection of witnesses that left no room for her to deny what she had done. Once I felt ready, I arranged to meet Melissa privately. I didn't want an audience. I wanted her to face the consequences without an escape. When we sat down, I laid everything out calmly but firmly. I showed her the photos, the receipts, the mail, and the notes from neighbors. "Melissa," I said, "this has gone too far. You've been using my home, lying about me to everyone, and even taking advantage of my address. You have a choice. Stop the lies and the exploitation now, or I will show everyone exactly what you've been doing." For a moment, I thought she might back down. But then she laughed, a cold, mocking laugh that made my blood boil. "Go ahead," she said, leaning back in her chair. "No one will believe you. You're just bitter and lonely. Everyone knows I'm the responsible one here. You're imagining things, Viv." Her words hit me like a slap, but instead of breaking me, they ignited something inside. I realized she hadn't just underestimated me. She had been counting on my fear, my hesitation, and my guilt to keep her safe. That smug sense of superiority, her belief that I was powerless, pushed me over the edge. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't alone. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. That was the moment I decided to go all the way. I wasn't going to negotiate or hope she would change. I had proof, witnesses, and the courage to finally confront the truth publicly if I had to. I knew that exposing her exploitation wouldn't just protect my home and my sanity. It would also stop her from continuing to manipulate everyone around us. For the first time, I felt a fierce sense of clarity and purpose. I wasn't acting out of anger alone. I was acting to reclaim what was mine and to ensure that no one could continue to take advantage of me. Melissa's mockery had lit a fire under me, and I was ready to burn through the lies and the deceit until the truth stood unshakable. I knew it was time to follow through. After gathering all the evidence and confronting Melissa, I realized that private warnings weren't enough. She had shown she didn't respect boundaries or consequences. I made the decision to report the fraudulent use of my address, first to the school district, then to the IRS. It wasn't easy. My hands shook as I filled out the forms, explained the situation, and provided the documents I had collected. But I knew it was the only way to protect myself and my home. Within days, things started moving faster than I expected. The school district contacted Melissa, questioning the enrollment of her children. Suddenly, the convenient school transfer she had arranged using my address was under review. At the same time, I received confirmation that the IRS had opened an investigation into the tax claims she had made while using my home. Brad and Melissa were now facing real consequences, ones that couldn't be waved off with jokes or mocking smiles. Word of the investigation leaked quickly through the family. To my surprise, extended relatives who had once scolded me and assumed I was in the wrong began to call, some cautiously apologetic, others shocked at the truth. "I can't believe she would do this behind your back," one cousin said. "I didn't know she was using your address like that," another admitted. For the first time, I felt vindicated. I had been labeled selfish and greedy for standing up for myself, but the truth was finally coming out, and it was undeniable. Of course, my parents didn't take it well. They confronted me angrily in my living room, their faces red, their voices loud. "Vivian, how could you do this to your sister?" my mother demanded. "This is tearing the family apart," my father added. I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of strength I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't afraid of their anger anymore. I wasn't backing down. "Family doesn't use me," I said, my voice steady, cutting through their accusations. "Family doesn't humiliate me. You treated me like a doormat for years, and I'm done. I set boundaries, and you ignored them. I gave warnings, and you mocked me. Now you see what happens when I protect myself. I'm not the problem, you are." The room went silent for a moment. My parents looked shocked, as if they couldn't understand that the quiet, patient daughter they thought they controlled had finally stood up for herself. I could feel a wave of relief wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of their judgment. For the first time, my home felt like mine again, not just a building, but a place where my rules mattered, where my boundaries were respected. Watching Melissa and Brad deal with the fallout was a strange mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. I hadn't wanted to humiliate them for fun, but I needed them to understand that manipulation and disrespect had consequences. That weekend, as I locked my door behind me and walked through my quiet living room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. Finally, this was my home, my sanctuary, and no one could take that away from me. The weeks after the confrontation felt surreal. Melissa and Brad were forced to move into a smaller apartment, their plans of convenience and comfort gone. I heard through the grapevine that their new place barely fit their family, and the bragging, carefree lifestyle they had flaunted in my home was replaced by cramped rooms and constant adjustments. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was simply the natural consequence of their choices. Watching the results unfold from a distance brought a quiet sense of relief. My parents, on the other hand, didn't come around. They avoided visiting, stopped calling as often, and gave me the cold shoulder whenever I tried to reach out. Their disappointment was palpable, and for a moment, part of me felt the sting of isolation. But instead of fear or guilt, I felt a strange, growing peace. I realized that what I had thought of as family, the people who could never respect me or my home, weren't truly my family in the sense of mutual care and trust. My home was mine now, and that mattered more than approval or acceptance from those who had only ever used me. The neighborhood, however, responded differently. Neighbors who had quietly witnessed the constant visits, the weekend chaos, and the eventual standoff came by with kind words and encouragement. "We're so proud of you for standing your ground," one neighbor said, handing me a small potted plant. Another smiled warmly and added, "It takes courage to protect your home like that. You did the right thing." Their recognition reminded me that respect doesn't have to come from blood alone. Sometimes, it comes from the people who see your struggle and admire the strength it took to face it. Sitting alone in my living room one evening, I reflected on everything that had happened. I hadn't lost my family, not really. What I had lost were the people who only pretended to love me while exploiting my kindness and my home. That realization, though painful at first, was liberating. It meant I no longer had to carry the weight of their expectations, their judgment, or their manipulation. I could live for myself, and finally, I could feel the pride and ownership that had been denied to me for so long. That night, I walked to the front door, keys in hand. I locked it, slowly and deliberately, taking a moment to appreciate the sound of the bolt sliding into place. But this time, it wasn't done out of fear, frustration, or a need to keep people out. It was done in full control, in complete awareness that this space belonged to me and me alone. The lock symbolized more than security. It was a marker of strength, of autonomy, and of self-respect. For the first time in years, I felt a deep, steady calm. My home was my sanctuary again, a place where I could breathe freely and live on my own terms. The past months had been exhausting, painful, and full of betrayal, but they had led me to this moment of clarity. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And as I turned away from the door and walked back into my home, I smiled softly. For the first time, I felt completely, undeniably at peace. Do you think Vivian made the right choice by standing up to her family and locking them out, or should she have tried to keep the peace instead? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. And if stories like this inspire you, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new one.